Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session 8, titled The Crisis of Multilateralism as Climate Diplomacy Finally Died. My name is Julien Touré. I'm very pleased to be the moderator of this session. And let me start by expressing I'm grateful I am to have been invited once again to moderate very stimulating and important discussion at this 17th edition of MEDays. As global divisions deepen and geopolitical rivalries intensify, the multilateral system that once served as the foundation for international cooperation is exhibiting concerning signs of wear. The inability of major economies to fulfill their emission reduction pledges, the disintegration of funding mechanism, and the growing divide between the global North and the global South have collectively undermined the credibility of the Paris Agreement process. The shift from commitment to actual implementation has revealed significant inequalities, while developed nations grapple with the challenge of reconciling decarbonization efforts with domestic political pressures. Consequently, developing countries are left to bear the burden of adapting to climate impacts with insufficient financial assistance. For Africa, for instance, this crisis carries both direct and existential consequences. The continent accounts for only 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, yet it experiences a disproportionate impact from drought, floods, and desertification. African leaders have consistently highlighted the necessity for climate justice, advocating for the realization of a 100 billion annual climate finance commitment, debt relief, and equitable access to green technology. However, the larger question remains, can the multilateral system reinvent itself to tackle the climate crisis, or are we witnessing the slow decline of the cooperative framework established over the past 30 years? This session will thus delve Let me briefly introduce to you our distinguished speakers that have been tasked to address those issues today. First, His Excellency Dr. Csaba Gondola, State Secretary for Circular Economy and Climate Policy from the Republic of Hungary. Yeah, you can applaud him. His Excellency Cyril Svoboda, former Deputy Prime Minister from the Czech Republic. His Excellency William Ernest Rommel, Chief Executive Parallel Histories from the United Kingdom. Her Excellency Nusa Bouchareb, former Minister and Vice President of the Mediterranean Climate House Foundation from Morocco. Bankole Olorutoba, CEO of Nigeria Climate Innovation Center. H.E.Mr, Chairman and CEO of H.E.Mrs Group and 013 from the United Kingdom. Walid Ouslati, Head of Climate, Biodiversity and Water Division at the OECD, based in Paris. And Irene Milla, Senior Fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies from London. So let me start this discussion with an easy question, general question, maybe for you, Dr. Sarbagondola. Would you say that climate diplomacy has lost its relevance, or can multilateralism be revived to meet the urgency of the climate crisis?
Thank you very much. Good morning to all. It is my great pleasure to be here in this prestigious panel. It's an absolutely relevant question just a couple of days after the COP30 that might left some bitter. You know, there is a lot of changes ongoing at the moment. We experience that the green transition and the digital transition is shaping our world, shaping our everyday life at the speed that never was experienced before. So we need to adapt to these changes, and this is absolutely true to multilateralism as well. I do not believe, just to put it first, I do not believe that multilateralism is dead, and I don't think there is a crisis even. I would say that there is a constant changes on the speed and the developments, but we need to adopt. In climate diplomacy is a really useful tool, but from my experience and everyday life or in the office, I experienced that there is always ambitions from the climate diplomats, and I'm kind of constitute myself as one of those. But when we sit down around the table and I'm starting to talk with my colleagues who is responsible for the budget and who is responsible for other fields that we might, you know, not getting across with each other, because our ambition is always high, and I think it's morally right and it's good, but we never reach the point where we can agree with the tools and methods of how we're gonna and how we want to reach our because China and India will emit that much that our ratio will be below. I think we still do our fair share. We, from 1990, we reduced our GHG emissions with almost 50%, and we are going on that track forward. So we do have a good experience how this can be managed while triple the GDP at the same time. But we experienced that ambition and the resources are not matching each other necessarily at the scale we would like to. So we need to talk much more with each other and try to find those tools and equipments that are suitable for all of the countries, because there is no one rule or no one procedure that could solve the climate change problem. And I think this is why regional cooperation are getting more important. Multilateralism is getting multi-layered in climate diplomacy as well. It's really difficult to reach an agreement with almost 200 countries at the same time. So like the Paris Agreement, I would say it's an agreement of once in a decade, maybe. So we need to put our ambition on the table, but expectations always need to meet with the reality as well.
Thank you, Mr. Gondola, for this first train of thought. I think all the other panelists will be able to pick up on what you said. Regarding that, Mr. Svoboda, the COP13 just ended on a mixed result in Brazil. What would be your take on the multilateral agreement regarding climate change in that regard?
Thank you so much. Thank you also for being invited. The climate diplomacy is not dead. but maybe is seriously ill. The problem is that, in my view, those who are from the bottom of their heart supporting climate diplomacy and those who are vigorously against, both they do understand that the climate problem does exist. That's very important. But now we face a new phenomenon, which is, in my view, very, very dangerous. It is the phenomenon of so-called ad hoc coalitions. This is very dangerous, because this is the way how to destroy the order. That's very easy to destroy order, saying we are the coalition of willings. So, and now we are at the time of the different interests, national, state interests, the problem of the divergence of the interests, and disbalance on the global level. So, we need to find the global balance. It is the task and homework for the big countries like United States, Russia, China, and the others. And when it is the case, we can put are on the scene for seeking, finding, and defining the new balance which could be acceptable globally. That's the question. So, I am, to be very short, of course I'm ready to answer the other questions and interventions, but the climate diplomacy does exist, but it is a slightly hidden story today because of the destroyment of the respect to the international order.
Thank you, Mr. Svoboda. I'm turning to you, Mr. Ramal. Earlier, a few minutes ago, Mr. Gondola mentioned that there is a gap between ambitions and concrete actions regarding fighting climate change. What do you think about this affirmation? Do you agree with the existence of such a gap? And if yes, what could be the options to reduce this gap between ambitious goals and concrete actions?
Thank you. You introduced me as the Chief Executive of Parallel Histories, which I'm delighted to be introduced thus. I'm also a former UK Government Minister for 8 years in the last Labour government, which gives me, in timescale, a slightly broader perspective. And I think there's always been a gap in climate diplomacy between ambitions and rhetoric and substantive actions by nation states. Perhaps that gap is greater now in the area that we're living in. And I think in terms of is climate diplomacy dead, I don't think it's dead, but I think it's severely challenged. And there are a lot of reasons to be pessimistic at the moment. One is the rise of populist nationalism in major developed states across the world, a political force that provides simplistic solutions to very complicated problems and sees action on climate change as an absolute anathema. And I think that's an enormous challenge. The US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement in 2025, driven by Donald Trump, has shaken the foundations of global climate governance. Bluntly, the European Union is divided in terms of actions and timescales, largely on a north-south basis. And COP30 in Berlin, which was meant to celebrate a decade of progress, instead exposed fractures and paralysis. And I think there was, for want of a better phrase, an unholy alliance between China and the Saudi Arabia and others. which blocked substantive articulation of how we end fossil fuels. Quite ironic, because in China, they're one of the best actors in terms of their own actions at the moment on tackling climate change, but they, for want of a better phrase, they don't like being told what to do. And that led to a less than perfect outcome for the summit. However, although COP30 didn't achieve all that we wanted, it still, I think, represented progress. We saw an emergence of an impressive coalition of 83 countries from the global north and the global south. Countries like my own in the UK are driving the transition forward, making historic investments in renewables and nuclear, upgrading millions of homes and acting to protect nature. And others, I think, rightly see green shoots of renewal. There's a new coalition of willing states, cities and private actors who are stepping in. So overall, I would say that climate diplomacy is not in the best state. It is challenged, but the scale of the challenge is such that we need to build on what has been agreed, and we need to re-inject in forthcoming COPs, re-inject concrete actions resulting from those COP summits to drive forward progress.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rommel. And I apologize for not mentioning one of your major experiences. All of them have very large resumes, and I could have spent 1 hour presenting them. And I made choices, maybe not always the right ones. Madame Bouchareb, je me tourne vers vous maintenant. Le Maroc apparaît assez exemplaire dans cette tentative d'équilibrer les grandes ambitions, notamment en matière de lutte au changement climatique, avec non seulement la mise en œuvre de mesures concrètes,
Permettez-moi de remercier les organisateurs de m'avoir associé à ce panel et de m'avoir invité au MEDays. Je pense que le Maroc n'a pas de leçons à donner, plutôt que des expériences à partager. Aujourd'hui, bien entendu, le Maroc, c'est en fait, durant ces 20 dernières années, le Maroc n'a cessé d'avancer dans son développement, pas uniquement à travers des déclarations ou des engagements uniquement, mais à travers des actions concrètes. Pour nous rappeler que les derniers chantiers, peut-être, qui ont été lancés par le Maroc, en associant bien sûr développement à l'agenda climatique ou à l'agenda de développement durable, nous avons tout d'abord sous les orientations de Sa Majesté, que Dieu l'assiste, renforcer notre cadre légal, et c'est très important, notamment le cadre légal permettant un développement intégré à travers la stratégie de développement durable que le Maroc 2030, que le Maroc a mis en place, ça fait pratiquement 6 ans, et qu'il a actualisé dernièrement. Aussi, le Maroc a mis en place un cadre institutionnel qui renforce aussi toutes les actions et les stratégies et les politiques mises en œuvre, pour vous dire que la première porte d'entrée pour asseoir un développement durable et équilibré sans pour autant nuire au climat et à l'environnement, c'est d'être dans une stratégie ou une approche intégrée prenant en considération et le développement économique, social, environnemental, tout en préservant bien sûr nos spécificités culturelles. Ça, c'est le premier pas. Le deuxième pas, c'est que le Maroc a toujours montré, joué son rôle d'élève en fait assidu par rapport aux grands agendas mondiaux, que ce soit l'agenda climatique ou autre. Et dans ce cas, le Maroc a présenté sa première indice. On est aujourd'hui à notre 3e version sur les engagements nationaux à travers l'indice 3.0. Et dans cet indice, au moment de la COP 30 à Belém, le Maroc a présenté ses nouveaux engagements, bien sûr en augmentant bien sûr les engagements concernant tout d'abord la réduction des gaz à effet de serre. Donc on a bien sûr proposé une indice très très ambitieuse par rapport en se comparant à d'autres pays bien sûr les plus avancés. On a une indice qui est très ambitieuse à partir du moment où le Maroc bien sûr veut tripler sa capacité de production de l'énergie propre ou renouvelable, qui sera supérieure à 15 gigawatts pour sortir progressivement du charbon d'ici 2040. Ensuite, le Maroc, dans son indice, a bien sûr proposé une réduction des émissions des gaz à effet de serre de 21,6%. Dans l'indice 2.0, elle était beaucoup moins que ça. Et bien sûr, a augmenté ses énergies, ses engagements en termes de part non conditionnelle, c'est-à-dire qu'il prendra lui-même en charge à 21,6% et la conditionnelle, elle est à 53,3%. Ça, c'est ce qui concerne en fait le climat. Maintenant aussi, on a travaillé sous les orientations de Sa Majesté sur en fait une stratégie intégrée qui prend en considération non seulement les énergies ou bien sûr les émissions, mais qui bien sûr intègre tous les secteurs. Et donc aujourd'hui, on a une stratégie nationale ou une politique que ce soit l'aviation, que ce soit le bâtiment ou l'habitat, dont je gérais ce portefeuille il y a 3 années ou 2 années de ça. Il y a bien sûr d'autres secteurs tels que les bus électriques qui aujourd'hui ont intégré bien sûr la politique du transport. Pour parler aussi d'autres politiques du tourisme ou une politique de l'agriculture aussi, on a des stratégies qui, dans la base ou bien dans l'approche ou la vision, se base principalement sur le développement de l'investissement, mais surtout sur la préservation des ressources et la création de l'emploi. Et je dirais que peut-être un des points forts que le Maroc peut partager avec d'autres pays, bien sûr amis, dans cet agenda qui ne cesse de faire des yo-yo aujourd'hui. On assiste à des avancées et puis on assiste à des retours en arrière, bien que la problématique, elle ne peut pas être résolue par un seul pays si on n'est pas dans une approche multi-actrice. Et bien entendu, ces yo-yo nous poussent aujourd'hui à être, bien sûr, à vivre des sentiments bizarroïdes, c'est des sentiments de frustration, des sentiments aussi de non-confiance qu'on a besoin de redresser et d'asseoir, parce que bien sûr un agenda mondial qui est comme celui du climat ne peut jamais être résolu par un acteur ou dans une approche je dirais bilatérale si on n'est pas bien sûr dans une approche multidimensionnelle, multi-actrice et bien sûr multipartite. Et de là aussi, j'aimerais parler aussi par rapport au Maroc du être basé sur des actions concrètes et pas uniquement des déclarations continentales, régionales, et puis voir un peu comment cette diplomatie, je dirais, internationale pourrait aussi être complémentaire par rapport à ce qu'on peut faire nous-mêmes au niveau de notre continent. J'espère que je n'ai pas été trop longue.
No. Merci beaucoup, Madame Bouchareb. You've just mentioned the question of trust and lack of trust. Mr. Oloruntoba, I will stay on this point of trust. What do you think explain the widening trust deficit between developed and developing countries in climate negotiations?
All right, thank you so much. I think that the trust systems between developing countries and also the rich countries, as we call, is totally broken, because again there's so much talk on one side, and there's no recognition of what the impact of the inefficiency of the multiple conversations that have been going on, and how does it translate to bridging the ever widening gap of infrastructure deficit. I think that for every time that there's a climate negotiation going on, the conversation sort of flies above the heads of developing countries and nestles only within the interest of the developed countries. And that, again, has made developing countries to continuously shrink back and look for alternative methods to try and bridge all the multiple solution, gaps and find solutions to their problems. Do we think that climate diplomacy is dead? Step and a different approach to how these climate negotiations are going on. I think it will help us to also drive a better and a stronger, positioning to how we can be not just the menu, but also be at the table, to have the conversations on how we can reduce global climate impact. In Africa currently, we know that there's a widening gap, when it comes to the need of either mitigation or adaptation. But these widening gaps are not just the problems, right? Is the thinking and the understanding behind it. And because we see that this is becoming more of economical, opportunities, that again is making the developing countries to also look at what are the best models that can help us share risks between the kinds of funds that come into our countries or our economies, and how do we help those who want to invest see the best out of it. Because again, whether we like it or not, there's no free lunch in Freetown. Nobody's going to give you a dime if it's not going to be beneficial to whoever is giving to you. And so every time we meet, like, the last COP in Belém and, the mixed reactions, frankly, I didn't expect anything different, I mean, it had happened 2 years ago, 3 years, every session is always, oh, we want this, we want that, but we're not getting it. And those that you expect to commit are finally telling us that we're really not interested in all this conversation. And now the thinking is, after all these years and all these conversations, we get to this critical point and you say you're not interested anymore. Well, how will the trust be built when constantly we are being told that we contribute less, but yet we suffer more, right, to climate change issues? We really need to have that thinking a bit more. And then when you look at the policies and the methods to how we think that we can negotiate on climate policy, it is always at our disadvantage. Developing countries, and not just Africa alone, I think developing countries will find another method or another way to sort of strengthen the kinds of infrastructure opportunities, that are currently found within the problems of climate change. So in Nigeria, for instance, we have gradually understood that climate change provides us a whole lot of opportunity to create a different type of economy for our country. For many times often, when we did our energy transition plan, there were a lot of backlash about why should we choose gas, right? And again, many schools of thought, you know, from all corners of the world said, oh, gas is not acceptable. But our question is this: we have this gas in abundance. What do we do with them? Do we keep flaring them and keep asking for more money, or we turn it into business so we can contribute, you know, to all global conversations? So I think that this distrust, again, it has been coming and we've been seeing it, but again, we're just not telling ourselves the truth. But now it's getting a lot clearer because more countries are beginning to look inward and trying to solve their internal problems, because almost every country's internal problems keeps widening by the day. And so are also developing countries. And then nobody will help you solve your problem until they have solved theirs. And the distrust will continue to remain until the backings of these diplomacies are converted into impacts, are converted into investments, and are also converted into risk-sharing opportunities, whereby you don't classify developing countries as a high-risk region, and by that, you don't want to inflow, you know, investment into developing countries. Right? And I think this
as I understand almost everybody's point right now, it seems that multilateralism, it's maybe not in a really good shape, but is not dead, at least yet, especially concerning climate change, but in general, I would say. All of you have mentioned that it's not dead, but it needs maybe to be renewed or rethink. I'm turning now to Mr. Misra. Would you have some ideas to renew multilateralism in that regard?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you for asking it, and it's great to be here. It's really interesting. I mean, I was recently in COP30 in Belém. It was my third COP, and I'll explain some of the observations, and we talk a lot about problems with multilateralism, and I really do think it's dying, but through cardiac arrest, it can be saved. And let me explain why. So, I mean, 3 years ago, coming from the capital market side, I knew nothing much about climate, knew nothing much about aspects of decarbonization or carbon credits. But by chance, someone came to me and said, okay, using technology, we wanted to set up a carbon exchange. I thought it would be like any other market. When I looked at the whole construct, I realized there wasn't really a carbon market. There was no pricing mechanism. And there were lots of climate pledges, but research led me to see, and this is getting worse now, there's a $4 trillion annual climate financing gap. That's been supported by numbers from multilateral organizations like the World Bank, but also others like the World Economic Forum and multiple other areas of research. So $800 billion a year. Every year I've been to COP, from COP 28 UAE to Azerbaijan last year, multiple climate pledges are made. And that's a multitude of individual pledges, but also multilateral pledges. Yet everyone strives to sign MOUs and be the next headline and be in the press boxes. Yet if you kind of fast forward a year or two from those pledges, very few of them actually materialize. So most organizations want the headlines, but they don't want to take the action required to make it happen. Now, I could argue, I mean, what's happened as well in carbon markets is there's something called Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. That actually is somewhat of a counter to multilateralism because it talks about bilateral agreements between countries, countries that broadly buy because they're emitting, and countries such as most African countries that broadly sell, and there's a type of carbon credit called internationally transferred mitigation outcomes under Article 6.2. Now, the very nature of that agreement fosters bilateral arrangements because the likes of Singapore are competing with Switzerland, Denmark, South Korea, and Japan to basically get hold of those carbon credits and signing individual agreements without much cooperation with other buying countries. With that backdrop, you've got others like the World Bank and UNDP trying to put in place infrastructure in countries, because there's two gaps here to address climate change. One is infrastructure, not just for renewable energy projects, waste to energy, agroforestry, so the technologies that allow that to happen, the inputs. But the other one is actually digital infrastructure to allow and it's entirely possible, but everyone wants to build their own walled garden and their own moat, whereas actually the big need here is, you know, in this modern day technology, I'm on a UK mobile phone network. Many of you I know there's a problem with Orange here, but Moroccan phone networks, but we can all speak to each other. We can all communicate on WhatsApp. Yet it beggars belief that the market infrastructure in these markets harks back to when I first started my career in capital markets, is in the 1990s. Nothing speaks to anything else, and actually there isn't really a will or a desire in many quarters to change that, but it has to happen to really allow this to scale. So how do we solve that? Because, you know, we've spoken about the problems, but I'm often one that looks at solutions. So we realize, okay, there's two aspects to this. One is platform distribution and the technology infrastructure, both for decarbonization and the creation of, let's say, carbon credits, but carbon credits alone, broadly, and I'll be provocative here, if you look at large companies like the big tech firms out there, and we deal with a number of those, and we deal with everything from the oil companies as well. Now, these are profitable businesses. They have P&L, they have quarterly, annual, half-yearly and annual results, they have shareholders to contend with. For them, yes, there's rhetoric around decarbonization, but they don't want that to be, in many cases, and it isn't, if you look at the numbers, more than 1% of their balance sheet because it's a cost. So the question is, now there's a massive proliferation of AI. AI needs data centers need power. There isn't enough renewable energy out there, despite, you know, some of the work going on in China and other quarters. So there's a movement back, you know, given what my colleague said about fossil fuels, to drive that, and coal and oil. Sustainability is a cost, and everyone talks about it as a compliance burden, but actually we see it as a revenue opportunity in the corporates, but also in countries as well. Because in Africa, if you look, there's a huge pool of natural assets, from mining restoration projects that could have rare earth extraction and carbon credits, and high value carbon credits under 6.2. But there's also agroforestry projects that can produce like the Kaptagat forest in Kenya, tea, coffee, avocados, macadamia. So we would argue, once you combine real output with carbon credits, because everyone's being asked to save forests, but those forests, the trees are chopped to use for fuel or to sell for income, that wood for fuel. If you don't replace that with communities, no one's going to change, and there's no protectorates of those assets. But once you combine that with a producing asset, and you combine that with carbon credits as an aside, the return on investment becomes far greater, and it creates an opportunity. Now, it beggars belief that most countries other than Botswana in Africa have a balance of payments deficit, yet we're asset rich, yet we're saddled with debt. So the multilateral model is failing because it's debt driven, it's not asset and equity driven, and we're going to see the tables start to turn with that, which we're already seeing in countries like Burkina Faso, who are taking control of their natural assets and looking to see how they can monetize them. And they also then have a big sustainability angle around the asset pool, so that you make money, but at the same time you follow ESG principles. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Mr. Weslati, an easy question for you. Do you believe that regional initiatives and partnership
Le MEDays, en fait, on voit très bien ce qu'on va au-delà de l'audience classique qu'on a quand on parle du climat et des problèmes d'environnement. Donc ça, c'est vraiment quelque chose d'assez souhaitable. Écoutez, pour répondre à votre question directement, j'aurais tendance à dire oui, mais pas assez. Ben, je vais essayer de m'exprimer. Avant de commencer, en réponse à la question principale du panel, est-ce que la diplomatie climatique est morte ou en train de mourir? C'est une question provocante et ça nécessite une réponse provocante aussi. Écoutez, si la diplomatie climatique meurt, c'est le destin de l'humanité qui est en cause. C'est sérieux comme exercice ou activité. Donc il est très important de signaler, sans aucun optimisme béat, l'importance de la responsabilité collective globale sur les questions du climat. C'est une question très sérieuse. Et pour ça, je voudrais me référer à la science, parce que la science a parlé. Et ici, j'essaye, sans vraiment m'aventurer dans un jargon scientifique complexe et qu'une large audience pourrait comprendre l'enjeu dans lequel on est aujourd'hui. Le GIEC, qui est l'organisme dépendant des Nations Unies, qui est aussi autonome et indépendant, qui regroupe plusieurs scientifiques à travers le monde, dans son rapport d'assessment numéro 6 qui a été publié il y a 2 ans, il nous dit que d'ici 2035, si on n'arrive pas à réduire les gaz à effet de serre de 43%, nous allons tout droit dans une bascule. Aujourd'hui, on ne veut pas parler où on a des problèmes. Certes, il y a des problèmes, mais c'est nécessaire. Alors pourquoi c'est nécessaire? Parce que des initiatives locales, nationales ou régionales auraient toute la chance d'améliorer la situation en termes de réduction des gaz à effet de serre, sauf les implications du changement climatique ne dépendent pas de la région qui est responsable de leur émission ou la région qui fait plus d'efforts. C'est un phénomène global. Si dans votre pays vous faites un effort extraordinaire, vous subissez quand même les effets de changement climatique. D'où la responsabilité collective. Nous avons face à nous un problème de bien commun, qui est le climat, à gérer ensemble, d'où la nécessité qu'on en parle, qu'on discute, qu'on met en place en règle. Et là, j'ai pour vous aujourd'hui 3 bonnes nouvelles à annoncer. La première bonne nouvelle, oui, la diplomatie climatique avance. Et c'est déjà pas mal. C'est parce qu'il faut regarder l'histoire dans sa continuité, dans le long terme. Je suivais ce dossier-là depuis 1992. C'est depuis la signature ou la déclaration des 3 conventions de Rio, dont une qui est la convention sur le climat, UNFCCC, biodiversité et sur la terre et la désertification. Ces conventions-là, ils ont beaucoup avancé. Il a fallu attendre 21 COP pour qu'on arrive à un accord qui dit que les pays s'engagent. Binding resolution, ça veut dire qu'ils ont une responsabilité à déclarer leur réduction de gaz à effet de serre. Ils doivent le démontrer à travers leur politique. Ça nous a pris encore 28 COP pour qu'on arrive à dire le principe de responsabilité partagés mais différenciés, ils doivent entrer en vigueur. Loss and damage, c'est COP Sharm el-Sheikh 28. Il nous a fallu beaucoup de temps en fait pour acter le principe que les financements de climatique doivent avancer. Et ça montre que nous avons avancé. Alors, nous avons publié à l'OCDE un rapport au mois de juillet dernier qui était basé sur une enquête qu'on a fait très largement auprès des parties de la Convention climat, où on avait demandé au gouvernement de répondre à un questionnaire: quelle serait votre politique climatique s'il n'avait pas un accord de Paris? C'est intéressant. À l'unanimité, tout le monde a dit que c'était très important. Donc ça montre que ça marche. Voilà, donc ça, je tiens à vous annoncer ça marche. Alors, deuxième chose qui est aussi très importante, et c'est encore une autre bonne nouvelle. Alors souvent, quand on parle de climat, on évoque la responsabilité du gouvernement. Alors stop, ce n'est pas que les gouvernements, c'est la société. C'est quoi la société? C'est la société civile, mais c'est aussi le monde des affaires, les entreprises, grandes, petites, etc. Alors la bonne nouvelle, la dynamique de ce côté-là, elle est plus qu'extraordinaire. Il y a beaucoup d'intérêts, quelle que soit l'échelle, les secteurs, etc. Il y a des dynamiques, il y a des initiatives. La société civile a été multipliée depuis 1992 sur les questions du climat par 10 fois ou même plus. Enfin, il y a des ONG, il y a des actions, il y a des initiatives de terrain. En fait, le gouvernement peut donner la framework, la structure sur laquelle les gens agissent, mais les gens agissent sur le terrain. Et ça aussi, c'est une très très bonne nouvelle. Et notamment, je signale avec beaucoup de satisfaction les futures générations qui, aujourd'hui, sont assez présentes. S'ils sont plus ambitieuses, quelles seraient leurs implications économiques? Alors, les implications économiques d'un engagement ferme sur le climat peuvent avoir à court et à long terme des retours sur investissement très élevés, et notamment en termes de croissance économique. Nous avons montré que d'ici 2030, si les packages qui ont été annoncés dans la nouvelle vague des indices pourraient augmenter le taux de croissance moyen à l'échelle planétaire, moyen, parce qu'il y a des pays qui feront plus de 3%. Et si on continue avec la même ambition d'ici 2050, ben, on sera à plus de 13%. Ça, c'est des simulations qui ont été basées sur l'état de l'économie actuelle et puis les échanges entre les pays. C'est des modélisations très sophistiquées qu'on a mis en place et avec des partenariats académiques et qui montrent que les résultats économiques marchent. Mais à condition que ces indices soient coordonnés, mis en place d'une manière concertée avec les acteurs locaux, mais aussi avec les partenariats commerciaux, etc. Donc l'investissement dans le climat peut payer en termes de croissance demain. Nous avons un double dividende, nous réduisons les effets sur nos économies des changements climatiques, mais aussi nous créons des emplois, nous sortons des gens de la pauvreté. Donc il y a des mécanismes qui sont intéressants. Bon, certains peuvent avoir des doutes sur ce que je dis. Et l'intuition derrière, sans entrer dans l'exercice de modélisation et de projection lui-même, l'intuition derrière, elle est très simple. La moitié de ces effets économiques positifs viennent du fait qu'on a évité des coûts sur le climat. Donc c'est ça qui est très important. Et ces coûts, ces implications, moyens et leurs infrastructures pour faire face. Donc, ils ont besoin de cette solidarité. Donc, des indices, enhanced indices, permettraient en fait plus à des pays partenaires en voie de développement d'en profiter que des pays en développement en soi. Donc d'où la nécessité encore de le faire. Donc la troisième bonne nouvelle, et là vraiment pour un forum dont la connotation business et économie est très importante, allez-y, ça vous paye demain. C'est mieux que de ne pas faire. Voilà les trois messages d'optimisme que je voulais lancer ce matin.
Thank you, Mr. Slati, for your optimism about climate change and fighting climate change. But yet, Mr. Ramal mentioned earlier some very serious challenge regarding fighting climate change, like the rise of populism in developed countries, great power competition, how developed countries scale back their commitment to climate change. We mentioned the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, but even the good student, Canada, is scaling back quite seriously its commitment regarding fighting climate change. So my last question would be for Mrs. Irene Meya. As the strategic thinker on this panel, how do you think the international community can overcome this kind of challenges?
That's a great question, very, very strategic. I guess I will just summarize a little bit because the U.S. government, right? Not the U.S. Country. The U.S. government disengaging from the topic, but also we see more and more friction, right? Friction between global South and global North on who should actually pay for the transition. We also see tension with the petrostate clearly. I think we also see something that non-state armed kind of group spoilers in the sense of criminal economies in the Amazon, for instance, which is actually something which it is a spoiler for multilateral effort and multilateral state effort. So I think there is a way, and I think that the Brazilians have actually already kind of shown the way in that way. I think definitely this multilateral approach, this collective action approach, which we have heard from the panelists, is a solution, is part of a solution, because also let's remember the state is not anymore the only actors, right? There are so many other actors, there are so many other non-state actors. There is as you mentioned, the youth population, you have the indigenous, which actually are the indigenous communities are very present this year in Belém. You have the cities, right? Cities are nowadays actually the center of economic growth. You have so many different actors which needs to actually step up as a multilateral, as a collective action. And I think clearly what we see is going to be a more fragmented climate diplomacy. The COP mechanism is not going to be the only place where decisions are taken or the agenda is progressed. I think it's going to be probably more of a polycentric system, whereby there are different centers of negotiation, also different action or deals or focus. But clearly, I think it is changing. It is also because the topics are changing in a way. There is also a bigger focus now on adaptation and crisis responses, because this is becoming increasingly a problem, right? We see, I mean, even in the developed world, we see more and more the impact of climate change and the climate crisis. So clearly, the adaptation, being more practical, right? Adaptation is and climate and crisis responses is going to be increasingly important. The trade element is going to be also important, because clearly, for the first time, we have seen the trade issue, which is part again of this geopolitical tension, I would say, right? Because clearly there is something around there. So I think in general, yes, a multilateral approach, like much more of a collective action, and I think, of course, we would all love another grand COP agreement like the Paris Agreement, but I don't think it's going to happen in the short term. But nevertheless, incremental progresses and from all of us, from the collective world.
Thank you very much. We still have some time left. Maybe if one of you want to add something or answer to one point that has been made, you can do so. Yeah, you'd like to? So, Mr. Gondola and then Mr. Svoboda. And maybe I will have time to ask you another or two questions, and maybe even the audience.
Thank you very much. I totally understand and agree with many of the thoughts that was made, but I just really want to highlight something that is more or less ambition, but more about realism. That there are three types of sustainability, to my mind. There is environmental, what we talk a lot. There is a social sustainability, and there is a financial sustainability. And any of these elements, if missing, that there is no sustainability, what we talk about. And there was a time for implementation, or the target setting, so ambition was high and trust was high, and ambition and trust is always high until you see the bill. Then you realize that it takes a lot of other types of commitment than just government will or civil will. And what we face in the European Union, that when you implement something that is related to green transition, it drives green inflation as well. It drives a lot of additional costs, what you would never expect on the first hand. And in that sense, there is a great excitement around these carbon credits as well. We already implemented, there are functioning carbon credits in Europe, and what we see that is basically a self-imposed disadvantage on your competitiveness. It sounds good, and it sounds right. I think it sounds morally right and makes sense. But I think it's also just simple a tax that it's punitive in nature instead of making policies that incentivize investment in that sector. I'm not saying that the European Union is doing all bad, because we've got good numbers and we've got good results as well. But I think all the other continents or groups would need to really investigate the pioneers in this green transition, that what mistakes were made in the last couple of years, because we obviously made a lot of mistakes, and that would actually help to bring the ambition to the level that it correlates with the reality as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Svoboda, you wanted to add something?
I want to say a very short remark. So this is my reaction to the role of the civil society. We Europeans, we need to have at least coffee, croissant, 2 holidays per year. So we are to enjoy our standard of living. And you are asking to do something with that. So because the climate change and the problems with the climate they are a little bit costly. So that's why we need governments. So of course the civil society is to pressure, to make a very strong pressure towards the government. But in the very end, we need the governments, because even in my country, we will have a new government, and the Minister of Environment is saying that the environment is a left ideology, totally unacceptable left ideology. So we will see how successful he will be in the position of the Minister of Environment, because he will be in a permanent conflict with everyone who is under his umbrella. So this is a very strong political item, and I agree with you, but I'm stressing that the governments are very important for pushing the things in the right direction.
Mr. Oslati, you want to add something?
Yeah, we are well aligned, so don't worry about that. Just, I'm from an organization which representing actually countries, it's about half of the global GDP. Yeah, your country is part of it. We are promoting market economies. That's our clear idea and our brand. However, with strong and high level of responsibility, including social inclusiveness and environment. That's clearly actually coming from our member countries. And when we talk about that, this includes an important and key parameter, how you value carbon. You cannot keep economies going as it is now without putting a value on the carbon. When I go to my grocery, I can buy apple. Apple coming from the nearby, it could cost me, for instance, €2. Apple from New Zealand, just close to that, it cost me €1.50. How it happens? Who paid for the carbon? Nobody. And that's what we need today to understand. The carbon pricing is important. There's many ways to do it, not only about taxation and fiscal solution. It could be, as you mentioned, market, and it could be standards or something. We have to give value to that, because in our economy, there's two things that today needs to be taken in account of our monetary or economic values. It's carbon and water. A lot of products are water embedded, and coming from countries when there's drought is very severe. However, with this idea of free trade, you can actually miss an important dimension of it. And finally, the social responsibility, but I will keep it for other panelists. I'm sure many others will.
It's a very quick point, actually. I mean, we talk about governments taking responsibility, and from a policy level, that's important. At the multilateral level, that's important as well. But the issue we have now is Western governments have no money. If you look at the current government in the UK, they cite a $20 billion annual budget deficit. In reality, it's probably $30 billion, and it's creative accounting, right? I mean, again, it's somewhere in the region of the two ranges. So, you know, we've cited governments don't have the money to pay for that. They might put in place policy that then drives the private sector to pay for that, or there's multilateral organizations like the aviation organization CORSIA dictate that actually airlines have to comply by the 31st of January 2028 with CORSIA credits. Now those credits are trading about $22 for one carbon credit, equal to 1 ton of carbon offset. And the price is likely to go up to $40 in the next few years. Now, who's going to pay for that? It's going to be ultimately be the consumer, because the companies want to maintain their positive P&L. And the question we've got to ask is the consumer willing to pay for it?
Yeah, great questions. We still have some minutes left. Maybe it's an opportunity to have some questions from the audience. Est-ce que quelqu'un dans le public? Yes, sir. Is there a mic? Yeah, a mic over there. And if possible, to present yourself and keep the questions relatively short. So that
my name is Robert Govers. I represent the International Place Building Association. It's irrelevant for this session, but it's a good example, flying. But if you're flying for €30 from Amsterdam to Barcelona, shouldn't you be willing to pay, double that for the? So I don't think that's a real problem. It's a good industry as an example, where we should be paying for the carbon emissions, right?
Yeah, that's probably one example. But then from Belém, I needed to get to Cape Town. And there's 2 flights a week, and for an economy ticket alone was £900, over £900. So what we're seeing is, airlines are passing on costs, even lost income for the last few years, and the cost of these CORSIA credits is going to be large. But some of them are already beginning to be very savvy and pass it on in airline fees, and we don't even realize it.
Thank you very much. Is there another question in the audience? No, I have one question. Oh, yeah, there is one. So, a brief one, yeah.
Merci à tous pour vos différentes interventions. Salih Bouba Oumarou, écrivain et chercheur. Donc, nous sommes arrivés à la conviction que le multilatéralisme sur le climat, la diplomatie climatique, n'est pas mort, mais il est en état comateux. Mais par contre, le minilatéralisme, lui, il n'est pas mort, il est vraiment solide. cette association de 2-3 États. Mais paradoxalement, ils ne s'intéressent pas à la question du climat. Donc, comment faire en sorte donc que ce minilatéralisme s'intéresse au climat de telle sorte que le multilatéralisme en soi, véritablement, puisse relever cette question.
We see more and more I know you don't like the coalition of the willing, but we do see more and more like regional agreement, or even if you look in the geopolitical landscape, I guess, of course, my region of coverage is Latin America, so you see more. On the climate agenda for developing countries, probably it's better to, obviously there is a more natural alignment with the EU, for instance. So I think more and more we will see those kind of smaller coalition of states on specific topics. And I think realistically is the way forward, right? Because it's just so different, and the geopolitical environment is so fragmented and difficult as well. I think it's going to be interesting to see also what China is going to do, right? Because there is obviously a big opportunity for China to fill the vacuum and obviously boost its soft power, which is at the moment is probably not just in the climate space, everywhere. So yeah, I think it's a very good point, and I think we are already evolving in that direction, I would say.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, just a very quick point. And I mean, I don't think you can entirely eradicate those silos. So let me just give you an amusing observation. So when I was in Belém, leading on from Azerbaijan, the African Union had a pavilion at Azerbaijan, and it was large, something like 300 square meters. It was the largest one by far in the whole of COP29. They asked for the same size this year, but all the African countries were shoved to the back, and the main thoroughfare had Brazil and other countries that could benefit Brazil, whether it's Saudi Arabia, Singapore, and other countries at the forefront where all the footfall was. So that because Brazil was competing for climate finance and wanted to show that they were leading, and the African countries in there didn't necessarily get what they wanted because obviously they were in competition for the same finance. So we're always going to see this. The question is, how do we reduce it, but we can't completely eradicate it.
Thank you very much. I think it's unfortunately all the time we had for this discussion. I'd like you to join me into thanking our panelists, but there is one thing I'd like to say to conclude this discussion. And you mentioned it, Mr. Weslati, I think. Don't forget that science is fairly clear about what's happening with the climate, and maybe be optimistic that multilateral settings are not maybe the best right now, but not everything is lost. There is room for optimism. So let's finish on this note of optimism. Thank you, dear panelists, for your time. Thank you very much.